Question 1. Strategic planning requires Mapfre to consider how a client's unexpected urgent need for a significant portion of their invested capital impacts their existing investment portfolio and risk profile. A Mapfre advisor has been informed by a long-term client that they require immediate access to funds due to an unforeseen personal emergency. The client's current portfolio is structured for long-term growth with a moderate risk tolerance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Mapfre advisor? Option A. Advise the client to immediately liquidate all investments to access the required funds, regardless of market conditions or potential losses. Option B. Maintain the current investment strategy and inform the client that accessing funds now would be detrimental to their long-term goals without exploring alternative solutions. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the client's financial situation and risk tolerance to determine the most suitable course of action, which may involve adjusting the investment strategy to meet immediate liquidity needs while mitigating long-term impact. Option D. Suggest the client consult with another financial advisor or institution that may be better equipped to handle their immediate liquidity needs. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the client's financial situation and risk tolerance to determine the most suitable course of action, which may involve adjusting the investment strategy to meet immediate liquidity needs while mitigating long-term impact. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial services where a client's personal circumstances may conflict with their stated investment objectives or risk tolerance. Mapfre, as a regulated financial institution, must navigate this by prioritizing client well-being and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in balancing the client's immediate financial needs with their long-term financial health, and ensuring that any recommendations are suitable and not driven by undue pressure or a misunderstanding of the client's true capacity for risk. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough reassessment of the client's financial situation and risk tolerance in light of their new circumstances. This means engaging in a detailed discussion to understand the reasons behind their urgent need for funds and how this impacts their ability to absorb potential losses. Mapfre's advisors must then determine if the existing investment strategy remains suitable or if adjustments are necessary to meet the client's immediate liquidity needs while minimizing adverse impacts on their long-term goals. This aligns with regulatory requirements for suitability and client care, ensuring that advice is tailored to the client's evolving profile and that the client fully understands the implications of any changes. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending immediate liquidation of all investments without a comprehensive review fails to consider the potential for significant capital losses due to market conditions or penalties, which could be detrimental to the client's long-term financial well-being and may not be the most suitable course of action. This approach neglects the duty of care and suitability obligations. Proceeding with the original investment plan without acknowledging the client's urgent need for funds or reassessing their risk tolerance could lead to a recommendation that is no longer suitable, potentially exposing the client to undue risk or failing to meet their immediate liquidity requirements. This demonstrates a failure to adapt advice to changing client circumstances, suggesting the client seek advice from a different financial institution without attempting to resolve the situation internally, or offering alternative solutions within Mapfre's capabilities fails to uphold Mapfre's commitment to client service and may be seen as an abdication of responsibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the client's current situation, including any changes in their financial needs or risk capacity. This should be followed by a thorough analysis of how these changes impact the suitability of existing recommendations. Regulatory obligations, such as those pertaining to suitability and client best interests, must be paramount. When faced with a conflict between a client's stated needs and their financial capacity or long-term goals, professionals should engage in open dialogue, explain potential consequences, and explore all viable options that align with both the client's objectives and regulatory requirements. Question 2. The control framework reveals that Mapfre's marketing department is proposing to leverage client data collected for policy administration to proactively offer them new, potentially beneficial financial products. What is the most appropriate course of action for an employee to ensure compliance and ethical conduct? Option A. Inform the marketing department that the proposed campaign is likely to be compliant as long as the new products are genuinely beneficial to the clients, and suggest they proceed with caution. Option B. Proceed with the marketing campaign, assuming that offering beneficial products justifies the use of existing data without explicit consent for this secondary purpose. Option C. Halt the proposed marketing campaign and initiate a review process to obtain explicit, informed consent from clients for the secondary use of their data for marketing purposes, in line with Mapfre's data protection policies and relevant regulations. Option D. Recommend that Mapfre update its internal policies to allow for broader data utilization for marketing purposes, provided that clients can opt out if they object. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the marketing campaign, assuming that offering beneficial products justifies the use of existing data without explicit consent for this secondary purpose. Explanation. The control framework reveals a potential conflict of interest within Mapfre's operations, specifically concerning the handling of client data and the subsequent marketing of related financial products. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an employee to balance their duty to protect client confidentiality and adhere to regulatory requirements with potential business objectives that might incentivize data utilization. Careful judgment is required to ensure that Mapfre's actions remain compliant with all applicable regulations and uphold ethical standards, thereby safeguarding client trust and the company's reputation. The correct approach involves a rigorous adherence to Mapfre's internal data protection policies, which are designed to align with the regulatory framework governing financial services in the relevant jurisdiction. This approach prioritizes client consent and data privacy above all else. Specifically, it mandates that client data is only used for the purposes for which it was collected, and any secondary use, such as for marketing new financial products, requires explicit, informed consent from the client. This aligns with principles of data protection and consumer rights, ensuring that Mapfre operates with integrity and transparency. Regulatory frameworks in this domain typically emphasize the need for clear consent mechanisms and robust data governance to prevent misuse. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with marketing financial products to clients based on their existing data, without obtaining explicit consent for this secondary use. This failure constitutes a breach of data privacy regulations, which often impose strict rules on how personal data can be processed and shared. Ethically, it erodes client trust and can lead to reputational damage for Mapfre. Another incorrect approach would be to interpret vague internal guidelines as permission to use data broadly for marketing, without seeking clarification or prioritizing explicit consent. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the spirit of data protection laws. Such an interpretation could lead to unintentional regulatory breaches and a perception of Mapfre as an organization that exploits client information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue, a potential conflict between data utilization and client privacy. The next step is to consult Mapfre's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines to understand the specific requirements regarding data consent and marketing. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification from legal or compliance departments is crucial. The decision should then be made based on the principle of prioritizing client rights and regulatory compliance, ensuring that any action taken is transparent, consensual, and fully compliant. This proactive and principled approach mitigates risk and upholds ethical standards. Question 3. Examination of the data shows that a Mapfre policyholder has submitted a claim following a significant event. While the policy terms are generally clear, there is a minor ambiguity in one clause that, if interpreted in a way that benefits Mapfre, could substantially reduce the payout. The claims department is under pressure to meet quarterly financial targets. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Mapfre's regulatory and ethical obligations? Option A. Advise the policyholder that due to the ambiguity, the claim is likely to be significantly reduced, encouraging them to accept a lower settlement to avoid further complications. Option B. Delay the claims process by requesting extensive and potentially unnecessary documentation, hoping the policyholder will withdraw the claim due to frustration. Option C. Interpret the ambiguous clause in favor of Mapfre to help meet financial targets, while ensuring the interpretation is technically defensible. Option D. Seek clarification on the ambiguous clause from Mapfre's legal department and apply the interpretation that is most beneficial to the policyholder. in line with the principle of utmost good faith. The correct answer is C. Interpret the ambiguous clause in favor of Mapfre to help meet financial targets while ensuring the interpretation is technically defensible. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee of Mapfre to balance the company's immediate financial interests with their ethical and regulatory obligations to clients. The core tension lies in potentially prioritizing short-term gains for Mapfre over the long-term well-being and fair treatment of policyholders, which could lead to regulatory breaches and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to navigate this conflict, ensuring that all actions align with the principles of good faith, transparency, and client protection mandated by regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's best interests and adhering strictly to the terms of the policy and relevant regulations, even if it means a less favorable financial outcome for Mapfre in the short term. This aligns with the fundamental principles of insurance regulation, which emphasize consumer protection and fair dealing. Specifically, this approach upholds the duty of utmost good faith that underpins insurance contracts and ensures compliance with regulatory requirements regarding claims handling and policy administration. By acting in this manner, Mapfre demonstrates its commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, fostering trust and long-term client relationships. An incorrect approach that involves prioritizing Mapfre's financial gain by interpreting policy terms narrowly or ambiguously to deny or minimize a valid claim would constitute a breach of the duty of utmost good faith. This could also violate specific regulations governing claims handling, such as those requiring prompt and fair settlement of claims. Another incorrect approach, which might involve pressuring the client to accept a less favorable settlement by withholding information or creating a sense of urgency, would be unethical and likely contravene regulations on fair sales practices and consumer protection. Such actions undermine the integrity of the insurance process and expose Mapfre to significant regulatory penalties and reputational harm. Professionals at Mapfre should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the policy terms and all applicable regulations. This should be followed by an objective assessment of the claim's validity based on the evidence. When faced with a conflict between company profit and client welfare, the framework dictates that regulatory compliance and ethical obligations to the client must always take precedence. This involves seeking clarification from legal or compliance departments if ambiguity exists and ensuring that all decisions are transparent, justifiable, and in line with the spirit and letter of the law and ethical codes. Question 4. Assessment of how a Mapfre employee should proceed when presented with a new, potentially profitable financial product that has not undergone a full regulatory impact assessment, but is being pushed for a rapid launch. Option A. Suggest a phased launch, starting with a small group of internal stakeholders to gather feedback before a wider release. Option B. Launch the product with minimal marketing materials, relying on sales staff to explain its features and benefits to customers. Option C. Proceed with the launch as quickly as possible to capitalize on the market opportunity, assuming customers will understand the product's complexities. Option D. Advocate for a comprehensive review of the product's regulatory compliance and customer suitability before any launch, even if it delays the release. The correct answer is D. Advocate for a comprehensive review of the product's regulatory compliance and customer suitability before any launch, even if it delays the release. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee of Mapfre to balance competing interests: the company's potential financial gain from a new product and the ethical obligation to ensure that product is suitable and fairly marketed to customers. The pressure to innovate and generate revenue can sometimes conflict with the duty of care owed to clients. Careful judgment is required to navigate this tension, ensuring that business objectives do not override regulatory compliance and customer well-being. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough assessment of the new product's implications, prioritizing regulatory compliance and customer interests. This means engaging with relevant departments, seeking clarity on potential risks, and ensuring that all marketing materials and sales processes adhere to Mapfre's internal policies and the applicable regulatory framework. This approach is right because it upholds the principles of responsible business conduct, which are fundamental in the financial services industry. Specifically, It aligns with the regulatory expectation that firms act honestly, fairly, and professionally in accordance with the best interests of their clients. By seeking to understand and mitigate risks before launch, Mapfre demonstrates a commitment to customer protection and regulatory adherence, thereby safeguarding its reputation and avoiding potential penalties. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue without adequate risk assessment fails to meet the regulatory standard of acting in the best interests of clients. This could lead to mis-selling, customer complaints, and regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over thorough due diligence ignores the importance of robust product governance and risk management frameworks, which are mandated by regulators to prevent harm to consumers. Finally, an approach that relies on assumptions about customer understanding without explicit verification or clear disclosures is ethically unsound and likely to contravene regulations requiring transparency and clarity in product offerings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core objective and then systematically evaluates potential actions against relevant regulatory requirements, ethical principles, and company policies. This involves seeking information, consulting with subject matter experts, considering potential impacts on all stakeholders, especially customers, and documenting the decision-making process. When faced with competing priorities, the framework should guide the professional to err on the side of caution and prioritize compliance and customer welfare. Question 5. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Mapfre employee who inadvertently shares sensitive, non-public information about an upcoming product launch with a client during a casual conversation? Option A. Advise the client not to act on the information and assume the matter is resolved. Option B. Immediately inform the Mapfre compliance department and follow their instructions for managing the disclosure. Option C. Attempt to retrieve the information from the client or downplay its significance. Option D. Contact the client directly to provide further details and context about the product launch. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the Mapfre compliance department and follow their instructions for managing the disclosure. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client interests with regulatory obligations, specifically concerning the disclosure of material non-public information. Mapfre, as a financial services firm, operates under strict regulatory frameworks designed to ensure market integrity and protect investors. The core of the challenge lies in identifying what constitutes material non-public information and determining the appropriate course of action when such information is inadvertently shared. A hasty or incorrect decision could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and legal repercussions for both the individual and Mapfre. The correct approach involves immediate escalation and adherence to internal policies. This demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. By promptly informing the compliance department and following their guidance, the employee ensures that Mapfre can take appropriate steps to manage the situation, such as issuing a public statement or restricting trading activity, thereby preventing potential market abuse. This aligns with the principles of transparency and fairness expected of financial institutions under relevant regulations, which mandate robust internal controls for handling sensitive information. An incorrect approach that involves ignoring the information or attempting to rectify it independently without involving compliance would be professionally unacceptable. Ignoring the information would be a direct violation of regulatory duties to prevent insider trading and market manipulation. Attempting to rectify it independently, without expert guidance, risks further breaches or an inadequate response, potentially leading to accusations of attempting to conceal a regulatory issue. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately disclosing the information to the client without proper authorization or assessment, would also be a significant regulatory failure, as it could lead to the information being misused and constitutes a breach of confidentiality and market integrity rules. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory adherence and ethical considerations. This framework typically involves 1. Identifying the issue and its potential implications. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and procedures. 3. Seeking guidance from the appropriate internal departments, e.g., compliance, legal. 4. Acting decisively based on expert advice. 5. Documenting all actions taken. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both regulatory requirements and Mapfre's ethical standards. Question 6. Implementation of a new client onboarding process at Mapfre has led to a situation where an employee discovers a close personal friend is seeking services. The employee has a strong personal relationship with this friend, which could potentially influence their professional judgment when assessing the friend's insurance needs and recommending suitable products. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Mapfre employee in this scenario? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to Mapfre's compliance department and follow their guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Option B. Proceed with the client engagement, assuming personal friendship will not affect professional judgment and that the friend will understand if any product recommendations are not ideal. Option C. Decline to engage with the friend as a client to avoid any appearance of impropriety, even if it means losing a potential business opportunity for Mapfre. Option D. Inform the friend privately about the potential conflict and ask if they are comfortable proceeding, without involving Mapfre's compliance department. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to Mapfre's compliance department and follow their guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client interests with regulatory obligations and internal company policies. The core dilemma lies in a potential conflict of interest where a Mapfre employee's personal relationship might influence professional judgment, potentially leading to unfair advantages or undisclosed risks for the client. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all decisions are made in the best interest of the client and in full compliance with regulatory standards, maintaining the integrity of Mapfre's operations. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the personal relationship to the relevant internal compliance department at Mapfre. This upholds the principle of acting with integrity and in the client's best interest, as mandated by ethical codes and regulatory frameworks governing financial services. By proactively informing compliance, the employee allows Mapfre to implement appropriate safeguards, such as reassigning the client or conducting enhanced oversight, thereby mitigating any potential conflict of interest and ensuring fair treatment and accurate risk assessment for the client. This aligns with the duty to avoid conflicts of interest and to act in a manner that is not detrimental to the client's financial well-being. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client engagement without disclosing the personal relationship. This failure constitutes a breach of ethical duty and regulatory requirements. It creates an undisclosed conflict of interest, undermining client trust, and potentially exposing the client to biased advice or preferential treatment that may not be in their best financial interest. Such an action could also violate Mapfre's internal policies designed to prevent conflicts of interest and ensure fair dealing. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to manage the conflict independently by downplaying its significance or believing personal assurances are sufficient. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the seriousness of conflicts of interest and the importance of formal disclosure mechanisms. It bypasses established compliance procedures, which are in place to protect both the client and the firm from reputational damage and regulatory sanction. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify potential conflicts of interest. 2. Understand the relevant regulatory and ethical obligations, e.g., duty of care, avoiding conflicts of interest. 3. Consult internal policies and procedures for guidance. 4. Disclose the potential conflict to the appropriate internal authority, e.g., compliance department, promptly and transparently. 5. Follow the instructions provided by the compliance department to manage or mitigate the conflict. This structured approach ensures that decisions are not only legally compliant, but also ethically sound and in the best interest of all stakeholders. Question 7. The risk matrix shows a potential inefficiency in Mapfre's claims processing workflow that could lead to delays in customer payouts. Which of the following approaches to process optimization best balances operational efficiency with regulatory compliance? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the existing claims process, identifying all regulatory touchpoints and redesigning the workflow to integrate compliance checks seamlessly into the optimized steps. Option B. Expedite the current manual claims processing by increasing staffing levels without altering the underlying workflow. Option C. Implement a new automated system that significantly speeds up claim validation with a post-implementation review of compliance. Option D. Introduce a simplified claims form that reduces data entry requirements, assuming this will inherently improve compliance by reducing errors. The correct answer is C. Implement a new automated system that significantly speeds up claim validation with a post-implementation review of compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Mapfre, as a financial services provider, operates under strict regulatory oversight designed to protect consumers and maintain market integrity. The risk matrix, a standard tool for identifying and prioritizing potential issues, highlights a gap in process optimization that could lead to regulatory breaches or reputational damage. The core challenge lies in balancing efficiency gains with the imperative to comply with all applicable laws and guidelines, ensuring that any process changes do not inadvertently create new risks or exacerbate existing ones. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective in improving operations and fully compliant. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and redesign of the identified process, incorporating regulatory compliance checks at each stage. This ensures that any optimization efforts are built upon a foundation of adherence to Mapfre's regulatory framework. This approach is professionally sound because it proactively addresses potential compliance issues before they manifest as operational failures or regulatory infractions. It aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to clients and the regulatory obligation to conduct business in a manner that upholds consumer protection and market fairness. By integrating compliance into the optimization process, Mapfre demonstrates a commitment to responsible business practices. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations that govern Mapfre's operations. Such an approach risks introducing noncompliance, leading to potential fines, sanctions, and damage to Mapfre's reputation. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment and stakeholder consultation is also flawed. This haste can lead to overlooking critical control points or failing to adequately address the concerns of relevant departments, potentially resulting in unintended consequences and regulatory scrutiny. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or past practices without validating them against current regulatory requirements is equally problematic. This can perpetuate outdated or non-compliant procedures, exposing Mapfre to significant risks. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific regulatory requirements relevant to the process in question. This involves consulting internal compliance teams and relevant regulatory guidance. Next, a thorough risk assessment should be conducted, identifying potential compliance gaps and operational inefficiencies. The chosen optimization strategy should then be developed with explicit consideration for how it will maintain or enhance compliance. Finally, a robust testing and validation phase, involving relevant stakeholders and compliance officers, is crucial before full implementation. Question 8. During the evaluation of Mapfre's claims processing workflow, a proposal is made to automate a significant portion of the customer communication and documentation verification steps to reduce turnaround times and operational costs. However, this automation involves using a third-party AI tool whose data handling and security protocols are not fully transparent and may not explicitly align with Mapfre's current data protection policies. Which approach best balances efficiency gains with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations for Mapfre? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive due diligence on the AI tool, including its data handling, security, and compliance with relevant regulations before full implementation, potentially phasing its integration. Option B. Reject the AI automation proposal outright due to the lack of full transparency, opting to continue with the existing manual processes to avoid any regulatory risk. Option C. Implement the AI automation immediately to capitalize on cost savings and efficiency, and address any potential compliance gaps retrospectively. Option D. Implement the AI automation, but require all customer communications to be manually reviewed by a compliance officer before being sent to mitigate data handling risks. Correct answer is C. Implement the AI automation immediately to capitalize on cost savings and efficiency, and address any potential compliance gaps retrospectively. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because Mapfre, as a financial services provider, operates under strict regulatory scrutiny. Decisions regarding process optimization must not only enhance efficiency, but also maintain compliance with all applicable laws and guidelines, ensuring customer protection and market integrity. A failure to balance these aspects can lead to significant reputational damage, regulatory penalties, and loss of client trust. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential bottlenecks, followed by the implementation of changes that demonstrably improve operational effectiveness without compromising regulatory adherence or ethical standards. This requires a deep understanding of Mapfre's specific regulatory obligations, which would include adhering to principles of fair treatment of customers, data protection, and robust risk management frameworks, as mandated by the relevant regulatory bodies governing financial services in the jurisdiction. The justification for this approach lies in its proactive and compliant nature, ensuring that any optimization efforts are sustainable and align with the company's legal and ethical responsibilities. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory impact would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to shortcuts that violate data privacy laws, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, if applicable, or compromise the integrity of financial reporting, thereby breaching accounting standards and financial conduct regulations. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment could inadvertently introduce new vulnerabilities or operational risks that are not adequately managed, potentially leading to breaches of consumer protection laws or market abuse regulations. Such approaches fail to uphold the fiduciary duty and the principle of acting in the best interests of clients and the market. Professionals should approach process optimization by first conducting a comprehensive impact assessment, considering regulatory, ethical, and operational dimensions. This involves consulting with compliance and legal departments, performing risk analyses, and ensuring that any proposed changes are vetted against established frameworks and guidelines. A structured, phased implementation with continuous monitoring and feedback loops is crucial to ensure that optimization goals are met responsibly and sustainably. Question 9. Compliance review shows that Mapfre's customer complaint handling process is experiencing significant delays, impacting client satisfaction scores. To address this, a proposal has been made to streamline the initial intake and categorization of complaints by implementing an automated system that flags keywords for immediate routing. However, concerns have been raised that this automation might bypass crucial validation steps designed to ensure accurate complaint classification and adherence to specific regulatory reporting timelines. Which approach best balances the need for process optimization with Mapfre's regulatory obligations? Option A. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the proposed automated system, involving compliance and legal teams, to ensure all regulatory requirements for complaint handling and reporting are met before full implementation. Option B. Proceed with the automated system, but instruct staff to manually double-check a small percentage of flagged complaints to ensure accuracy. Option C. Implement the automated keyword flagging system immediately to reduce backlog, with a plan to review its compliance implications retrospectively. Option D. Defer the automation project and focus on hiring additional staff to manually process complaints, as this poses less immediate regulatory risk. The correct answer is C. Implement the automated keyword flagging system immediately to reduce backlog, with a plan to review its compliance implications retrospectively. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Mapfre, as a regulated financial institution, must balance the drive for operational efficiency with its stringent regulatory obligations. The pressure to optimize processes can sometimes lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical compliance steps, which could result in significant penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of client trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise adherence to regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks, and then proposing and implementing changes that are vetted for compliance before deployment. This ensures that any optimization efforts are not only effective in improving efficiency, but also fully aligned with Mapfre's regulatory responsibilities. Specifically, this approach aligns with principles of robust risk management and good corporate governance, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory bodies overseeing financial services. The emphasis on documentation and validation safeguards against unintentional breaches and provides an audit trail. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without adequate compliance checks is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the implementation of processes that inadvertently violate data privacy regulations, anti-money laundering, AML requirements, or customer protection rules. For example, automating a customer onboarding process without ensuring it meets Know Your Customer (KIC) standards would be a direct regulatory failure, exposing Mapfre to fines and sanctions. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or without consulting relevant compliance departments. This bypasses essential due diligence and increases the risk of noncompliance, as it fails to consider the nuanced legal and regulatory implications of process modifications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a compliance by design philosophy. This means integrating regulatory considerations into the earliest stages of process design and optimization. When faced with a need for process improvement, professionals should 1. Clearly define the objective. 2. Identify all relevant regulatory requirements pertaining to the process. 3. Brainstorm potential solutions. 4. Rigorously assess each solution against both efficiency goals and regulatory mandates. 5. Conduct thorough testing and validation with compliance oversight. And 6. Document all changes and justifications. This structured approach ensures that efficiency is pursued responsibly and sustainably within the legal and ethical boundaries. Question 10. Performance analysis shows that Mapfre's claims processing department is experiencing delays, impacting customer satisfaction. A proposal has been made to implement a new automated system that significantly speeds up claim adjudication. However, the proposal does not explicitly detail how this new system will ensure continued adherence to Mapfre's internal data protection policies and relevant financial conduct regulations concerning customer communication during the claims process. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible approach for Mapfre to take in evaluating this proposal? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed automated system, specifically assessing its alignment with Mapfre's data protection policies and all applicable financial conduct regulations, involving legal and compliance teams before any implementation. Option B. Implement the automated system with a phased rollout, allowing the claims department to adapt while simultaneously developing separate compliance checks that can be retrofitted later. Option C. Prioritize the speed of claims processing above all else, and address any potential compliance issues that arise only after the system has been fully operational for a significant period. Option D. Proceed with the implementation of the new automated system immediately to address customer dissatisfaction, assuming that standard IT security measures will inherently cover all regulatory requirements. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the implementation of the new automated system immediately to address customer dissatisfaction, assuming that standard IT security measures will inherently cover all regulatory requirements. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Mapfre, as a financial services provider, operates within a highly regulated environment. The pressure to optimize processes for efficiency must be balanced against stringent compliance requirements designed to protect customers and maintain market integrity. A hasty or incomplete approach to process optimization could inadvertently lead to breaches of regulatory obligations, reputational damage, and financial penalties. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise adherence to legal and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing changes that are demonstrably compliant with all applicable Mapfre policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. This includes consulting with legal and compliance departments to ensure proposed changes do not violate any regulations concerning customer data handling, disclosure, or fair treatment. The justification for this approach lies in its proactive commitment to regulatory adherence and ethical conduct, which are paramount in the financial services industry. By integrating compliance from the outset, Mapfre mitigates risks and builds trust with its stakeholders, An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness risks overlooking critical regulatory requirements. For instance, automating a process without verifying that the new system adheres to data privacy laws, e.g., GDPR, if applicable to Mapfre's operations in relevant jurisdictions, would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Similarly, streamlining customer communication channels without ensuring that all necessary disclosures are still being made in a clear and accessible manner would violate consumer protection regulations. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing changes that could inadvertently create conflicts of interest or disadvantage certain customer segments, thereby contravening principles of fair dealing and market conduct. These failures stem from a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the foundational principles of responsible business operations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to Mapfre's operations. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and internal policies. Next, they should assess the potential impact of any proposed process change on compliance and ethical consideration. This assessment should involve cross-functional collaboration, particularly with legal, compliance, and risk management teams. Finally, decisions should be made based on a clear demonstration that the optimized process meets both efficiency objectives and all regulatory and ethical obligations. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that Mapfre is seeking to optimize its claims processing workflow. Which of the following approaches best balances the pursuit of operational efficiency with the imperative to uphold regulatory compliance and customer trust? Option A. Implementing automated decision-making for all claims, regardless of complexity, to expedite processing times. Option B. Prioritizing the adoption of new technologies that promise speed improvements, without a thorough assessment of their impact on data privacy and regulatory reporting requirements. Option C. Conducting a comprehensive review of the current claims process, identifying areas for improvement, and then designing and testing new workflows that incorporate regulatory checks and balances before full deployment. Option D. Reducing the number of staff involved in claims handling to cut operational costs, assuming that remaining staff can manage the workload. Correct answer is A. Implementing automated decision-making for all claims, regardless of complexity, to expedite processing times. Explanation. Scenario analysis. Mapfre's commitment to process optimization presents a professionally challenging scenario. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for efficiency with the imperative to maintain regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Decisions made during process optimization can inadvertently impact customer data handling, product suitability assessments, or complaint resolution procedures, all of which are heavily regulated. Therefore, careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise Mapfre's adherence to its regulatory obligations and ethical standards. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, followed by the implementation of changes that enhance operational effectiveness without compromising regulatory adherence or customer welfare. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes a holistic view of business operations, integrating efficiency with compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good governance and responsible business conduct expected of financial institutions like Mapfre, ensuring that all operational changes are vetted against relevant regulatory frameworks and ethical considerations, such as those outlined by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA in the UK, which emphasizes treating customers fairly and maintaining market integrity. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on regulatory compliance, risks, violating principles of due diligence and responsible business conduct. For instance, automating customer service without ensuring adequate human oversight for complex queries could lead to breaches of the FCA's principles regarding providing suitable advice and treating customers fairly. An approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment could lead to unintended consequences. If new, streamlined processes are not adequately tested for their impact on data security or the accuracy of information provided to customers, Mapfre could face regulatory sanctions for data protection breaches or mis-selling. An approach that bypasses established internal control frameworks in the name of agility is also professionally unsound. These frameworks are designed to ensure that operations are conducted in a compliant and ethical manner. Deviating from them, even with good intentions for efficiency, can expose Mapfre to significant regulatory and reputational risks, potentially contravening requirements for robust internal governance. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Mapfre should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape governing their operations. When considering process optimization, they should ask, does this change enhance efficiency while maintaining or improving our adherence to all applicable laws and ethical standards? This involves proactive risk identification, stakeholder consultation, including compliance and legal departments, and pilot testing of changes before full implementation. The ultimate goal is to achieve operational excellence in a manner that is both sustainable and compliant. Question 12. The performance metrics show a consistent decline in customer satisfaction scores for a specific product line within Mapfre over the last 2 quarters. While the product remains profitable, the downward trend is noticeable. An employee is tasked with addressing this. Which of the following represents the most appropriate initial course of action? Option A. Conduct a detailed investigation into the root causes of the declining customer satisfaction, consulting internal data, customer feedback channels, and relevant Mapfre policies before proposing any remedial actions. Option B. Immediately implement aggressive marketing campaigns to highlight the product's profitability and value proposition, aiming to offset the satisfaction dip with increased sales volume. Option C. Assume the decline is a temporary market fluctuation and continue with the current operational strategy, focusing on other areas with more positive performance indicators. Option D. Propose a significant price reduction for the product to immediately boost customer satisfaction, without a thorough analysis of the financial implications or underlying issues. The correct answer is B. Immediately implement aggressive marketing campaigns to highlight the product's profitability and value proposition, aiming to offset the satisfaction dip with increased sales volume. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Mapfre to interpret performance data in the context of regulatory expectations and ethical conduct. The challenge lies in distinguishing between acceptable business practices that might lead to lower short-term metrics and actions that could be construed as misleading or non-compliant. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of performance improvement does not compromise integrity or violate regulatory guidelines. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the performance metrics, cross-referencing them with Mapfre's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct. By seeking clarification and understanding the underlying reasons for the observed metrics, the individual demonstrates a commitment to responsible business practices, which is a core expectation under regulatory oversight. This proactive and investigative stance ensures that any actions taken are informed and aligned with legal and ethical standards, thereby protecting Mapfre and its stakeholders. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate metric improvement without considering the regulatory context is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to actions that, while appearing to boost numbers, might involve misrepresentation or a disregard for customer best interests, potentially violating regulations concerning fair treatment of customers or accurate reporting. Another incorrect approach that involves ignoring the metrics altogether, assuming they are irrelevant, is also flawed. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and an abdication of responsibility to monitor and understand business performance, which can lead to undetected issues and potential regulatory breaches. Finally, an approach that involves making assumptions about the data without verification or seeking expert advice is risky. This can result in misinterpretations that lead to non-compliant decisions, failing to uphold the professional duty of care expected of employees at Mapfre. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the context and objectives. This involves gathering all relevant information, including performance data and applicable regulations. Next, they should analyze the information critically, identifying potential issues or deviations. If uncertainties exist, seeking clarification from supervisors, compliance officers, or legal counsel is paramount. The decision should then be made based on a clear understanding of regulatory requirements, ethical principles, and Mapfre's internal policies, ensuring that the chosen course of action is both effective and compliant. Question 13. The audit findings indicate that Mapfre's current customer consent forms for data processing may not fully align with the explicit consent requirements stipulated by the relevant data protection regulations in its operating jurisdiction, potentially leading to a breach of privacy laws. Which of the following actions should Mapfre's compliance team prioritize to address this finding? Option A. Continue using the existing consent forms while initiating a dialogue with the sales department to explore ways to expedite the sales process, assuming the current forms have been in use without major issues previously. Option B. Classify the audit finding as a low-priority administrative issue, focusing resources on more significant operational risks identified in other departments. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all customer consent forms and data processing agreements to ensure they clearly and unambiguously inform customers about the specific purposes of data usage, obtaining explicit consent in line with regulatory mandates. Option D. Advise the sales team to verbally inform customers about data usage during the sales pitch, considering this a sufficient supplementary measure to the written consent forms. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all customer consent forms and data processing agreements to ensure they clearly and unambiguously inform customers about the specific purposes of data usage, obtaining explicit consent in line with regulatory mandates. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Mapfre employees to navigate potential conflicts between internal company policies and external regulatory requirements, specifically concerning data privacy and customer consent. The audit findings highlight a discrepancy that could lead to regulatory breaches if not addressed appropriately. Careful judgment is required to ensure that Mapfre's operations remain compliant and ethically sound, protecting both the company and its customers. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the consent mechanisms against the specific data protection regulations applicable to Mapfre's operations within its primary jurisdiction. This means verifying that the language used for consent is clear, unambiguous, and informs customers about how their data will be used, aligning with the principles of explicit consent and transparency. This approach is correct because it prioritizes adherence to the law, which is paramount in the financial services industry. Regulatory bodies expect companies to have robust data handling practices that respect customer privacy rights. By ensuring consent mechanisms are compliant, Mapfre mitigates the risk of fines, reputational damage, and legal action. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the existing consent forms are sufficient simply because they have been in use for a long time. This fails to acknowledge that regulations evolve and that ongoing compliance checks are necessary. The regulatory failure here is a lack of proactive due diligence and a reliance on outdated practices, which can lead to unintentional breaches of data protection laws. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize the convenience of the sales team over regulatory compliance. Modifying consent procedures to make them less stringent might streamline sales processes, but would likely violate data privacy principles. This approach demonstrates a disregard for customer rights and regulatory obligations, potentially leading to severe penalties. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings as minor or a mere technicality without understanding the underlying regulatory implications. This shows a lack of professional responsibility and an insufficient appreciation for the importance of data protection. Such an attitude can foster a culture of non-compliance within the organization. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory requirements relevant to the situation. This involves consulting legal and compliance departments, reviewing audit reports critically, and seeking clarification on any ambiguities. The next step is to assess the identified issue against these requirements, determining the precise nature of the noncompliance. Based on this assessment, the professional should then propose and implement corrective actions that bring the company's practices into full regulatory alignment, documenting all steps taken. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and uphold the highest standards of professional conduct and regulatory adherence. Question 14. Market research demonstrates that certain investment products offered by Mapfre have significantly higher commission structures for the company compared to others. An employee is advising a client on investment options. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Mapfre employee in this situation? Option A. Recommend the product with the highest commission for Mapfre, assuming it generally meets the client's stated objectives. Option B. Recommend a product that offers a moderate commission for Mapfre, as a compromise between client suitability and company profitability. Option C. Fully disclose the commission differences and potential conflicts of interest to the client, and then recommend the product that is most suitable for the client's individual financial situation and risk tolerance, regardless of commission. Option D. Prioritize recommending products with lower commission structures for Mapfre to ensure the client perceives unbiased advice, even if slightly less suitable options exist. The correct answer is A. Recommend the product with the highest commission for Mapfre, assuming it generally meets the client's stated objectives. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Mapfre employees due to the inherent conflict between client interests and the company's potential for increased revenue. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of regulatory obligations and ethical conduct. The core challenge lies in ensuring that recommendations are driven by client suitability and regulatory compliance, rather than by incentives that could lead to mis-selling or inappropriate product placement. The correct approach involves prioritizing a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives before recommending any product, including those that might offer Mapfre a higher commission. This aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on treating customers fairly and acting in their best interests. Specifically, it adheres to principles that mandate suitability assessments and disclosure of potential conflicts of interest, ensuring that client needs are paramount. An incorrect approach would be to recommend a product primarily because it generates a higher commission for Mapfre, without adequately considering if it is the most suitable option for the client's specific circumstances. This failure constitutes a breach of the duty to act in the client's best interest and could lead to regulatory sanctions for mis-selling and a loss of client trust. Another incorrect approach would be to omit full disclosure of the commission structure and potential conflicts of interest. This lack of transparency directly violates regulatory requirements for clear and honest communication, undermining the client's ability to make an informed decision. Professionals at Mapfre should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the client's profile. This should be followed by an objective evaluation of all available products against the client's needs and regulatory suitability criteria. Any potential conflicts of interest, such as differential commission rates, must be clearly disclosed to the client. The ultimate decision should always be justifiable based on the client's best interests and adherence to all applicable regulations. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that outsourcing Mapfre's customer onboarding process to a third-party vendor could significantly reduce operational expenses. However, this vendor has a less robust data security infrastructure compared to Mapfre's current internal systems, which approach best balances cost reduction with Mapfre's regulatory and ethical obligations. Option A. Conduct a thorough due diligence on the vendor's data security and compliance protocols, ensuring they meet or exceed Mapfre's internal standards and all relevant regulatory requirements, and negotiate terms that mitigate any identified risks before proceeding. Option B. Reject the outsourcing proposal outright, as any reduction in data security infrastructure is unacceptable, regardless of potential cost savings. Option C. Outsource the process but implement additional, costly internal controls to compensate for the vendor's weaker security, negating much of the intended cost savings. Option D. Proceed with the outsourcing to the lowest cost vendor, assuming the cost savings outweigh the marginal increase in data security risk. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the outsourcing to the lowest cost vendor, assuming the cost savings outweigh the marginal increase in data security risk. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Mapfre, as a financial services provider, must balance the pursuit of efficiency and cost savings with its fundamental obligations to clients and regulatory compliance. The pressure to reduce operational expenses can inadvertently lead to compromises in service quality, data security, or adherence to regulatory mandates, potentially exposing the company to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that cost-saving measures do not undermine these critical areas. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment that prioritizes regulatory compliance and client protection above immediate cost savings. This means that any proposed cost reduction strategy, such as outsourcing certain client-facing functions, must undergo rigorous due diligence to ensure the chosen vendor adheres to all applicable Mapfre policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, including data privacy laws and consumer protection regulations. The justification for this approach lies in the paramount importance of maintaining client confidentiality, data security, and fair treatment, which are non-negotiable ethical and legal requirements for financial institutions. Regulatory bodies expect financial firms to act in the best interests of their clients, and this includes ensuring that third-party providers meet the same high standards. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the lowest cost provider without adequate scrutiny of their compliance and security protocols. This failure would stem from prioritizing financial expediency over regulatory adherence and ethical responsibility. Specifically, selecting a vendor based purely on cost could lead to breaches of data protection laws, inadequate consumer complaint handling, or a failure to meet service-level agreements, all of which carry significant regulatory penalties and reputational risks. Another incorrect approach would be to implement cost-saving measures that reduce essential client support or advisory services without a clear, compliant, and client-centric alternative. This would violate the ethical duty to provide adequate service and could contravene consumer protection regulations that mandate reasonable access to support and information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant regulatory obligations and ethical considerations. This should be followed by a thorough risk assessment of any proposed change, evaluating potential impacts on clients, data security, and compliance. Only after confirming that a proposed solution meets or exceeds all regulatory and ethical standards should its cost-benefit be considered. If a cost-saving measure introduces new risks or compromises existing standards, it should be rejected or modified until compliance is assured. Question 16. Investigation of a client's unusual transaction patterns by a Mapfre financial advisor, which appear to deviate significantly from their established financial behavior and could potentially indicate money laundering activities, requires a careful and regulated response. The advisor has received a tip from a trusted source within the client's business network, providing specific details about the potential illicit nature of these transactions. The advisor must decide on the most appropriate immediate course of action. Option A. Directly contact the client to inquire about the unusual transactions and the source of the tip-off, explaining the need for clarification. Option B. Conduct an independent, in-depth investigation into the client's entire financial history and business dealings without informing Mapfre's compliance department. Option C. Ignore the tip-off and the transaction patterns, assuming the client is acting within their rights and that the source may be unreliable to avoid unnecessary client friction. Option D. Immediately report the suspicions and the tip-off details to Mapfre's designated Money Laundering Reporting Officer, MLRO, or Compliance Department for further investigation and guidance. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the suspicions and the tip-off details to Mapfre's designated Money Laundering Reporting Officer, MLRO, or Compliance Department for further investigation and guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Mapfre employee due to the inherent conflict between maintaining client confidentiality and the regulatory obligation to report suspicious activities. The employee must exercise sound judgment to balance these competing interests, understanding that a failure to report could have significant legal and reputational consequences for both the client and Mapfre, while an unfounded report could damage the client relationship and Mapfre's reputation. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the information received, focusing on identifying potential red flags that align with known indicators of financial crime or regulatory breaches. This approach is justified by the regulatory framework governing financial institutions, which mandates robust anti-money laundering (AML) and counter-terrorist financing (CTF) procedures. Specifically, regulations require employees to be vigilant and to escalate any suspicions of illicit activity to the designated Compliance or MLRO, Money Laundering Reporting Officer, function within Mapfre. This ensures that potential threats are investigated by specialized personnel, who can then make an informed decision about reporting to the relevant authorities, thereby fulfilling Mapfre's legal obligations and protecting its integrity. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the information outright without any form of internal review. This failure to investigate potential red flags is a direct contravention of AML/CTF regulations, which place a proactive duty on employees to be aware of and report suspicious transactions or activities. Another incorrect approach would be to directly confront the client about the suspicions without involving the compliance department. This action breaches client confidentiality protocols and could tip off the client, hindering any potential investigation by law enforcement and potentially leading to the destruction of evidence. Furthermore, it bypasses the established internal reporting channels, undermining Mapfre's compliance framework. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to regulatory requirements and internal policies. This involves 1. Recognizing potential risk indicators. 2. Documenting observations objectively. 3. Consulting internal policies and procedures for guidance. 4. Escalating concerns through the designated reporting lines, e.g., to a supervisor or compliance officer, without delay. 5. Avoiding personal judgment or direct engagement with the client on sensitive matters until authorized by the compliance function. Question 17. Strategic planning requires Mapfre to thoroughly evaluate the potential risks associated with launching a new insurance product. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and sound risk management principles for this new product assessment? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and plans mitigation strategies for all potential market, operational, compliance, and consumer-related risks before product launch, ensuring alignment with relevant Mapfre policies and regulatory frameworks. Option B. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to an external third-party vendor without establishing internal oversight or validation mechanisms for their findings. Option C. Rely solely on historical risk data from previously launched similar products, assuming current market conditions and regulatory requirements will not introduce new or amplified risks. Option D. Prioritize the potential revenue generation of the new product and conduct a cursory review of risks only after launch. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the potential revenue generation of the new product and conduct a cursory review of risks only after launch. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Mapfre, as a financial services institution, operates within a highly regulated environment. The assessment of risks associated with a new product launch is not merely a business decision, but a critical compliance and ethical imperative. Failure to adequately identify and mitigate risks can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and harm to consumers, all of which are directly contrary to regulatory expectations and ethical conduct. The challenge lies in balancing innovation and market opportunity with the stringent requirements for consumer protection and financial stability. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, forward-looking risk assessment that integrates regulatory compliance from the outset. This means proactively identifying potential risks across all relevant areas, including market, operational, credit, liquidity, and compliance risks, and then developing robust mitigation strategies. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of sound risk management and regulatory oversight, which mandate that firms like Mapfre must anticipate and manage potential adverse events before they occur. Specifically, regulatory frameworks for financial institutions typically require a proactive and documented risk assessment process for new products and services to ensure they do not expose the firm or its customers to undue risk, and that they comply with all applicable laws and consumer protection regulations. This proactive stance is essential for maintaining the integrity of the financial system and upholding public trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential profitability of the new product without a thorough risk assessment is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory obligations that prioritize consumer protection and financial stability over short-term gains. Such an approach risks violating regulations designed to prevent mis-selling, inadequate disclosure, or the introduction of products that are too complex or risky for the target market. Another incorrect approach that relies on historical data from similar, but not identical, products without considering the unique aspects of the new offering is also flawed. While historical data can be informative, it is insufficient if it does not account for the specific market conditions, customer demographics, and regulatory nuances of the proposed new product. This can lead to an underestimation of emerging risks and a failure to implement appropriate controls, thereby contravening the regulatory requirement for a tailored and thorough risk assessment. Finally, an approach that delegates the entire risk assessment process to an external consultant without internal oversight or validation is problematic. While external expertise can be valuable, Mapfre retains ultimate responsibility for its risk management and compliance. A lack of internal engagement and understanding of the risk assessment findings can lead to a disconnect between the assessment and the actual implementation of mitigation strategies, potentially resulting in regulatory breaches and operational failures. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, multidisciplinary approach. This begins with clearly defining the scope of the new initiative. Subsequently, a comprehensive risk identification process should be undertaken, involving all relevant departments, e.g., product development, legal, compliance, risk management, sales. For each identified risk, its potential impact and likelihood should be assessed. Mitigation strategies should then be developed and documented, with clear ownership and timelines for implementation. Crucially, the entire process must be reviewed and approved by senior management and the board, ensuring alignment with the company's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. Ongoing monitoring and periodic reassessment of risks are also vital components of this framework. Question 18. The audit findings indicate that Mapfre's planned integration of a new customer relationship management (CRM) system, which will consolidate policyholder data and alter communication protocols, has not yet undergone a formal review by the Compliance Department to assess its adherence to data protection regulations and consumer notification requirements. The project team is eager to proceed with the integration to streamline operations. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation while adhering to regulatory requirements and professional ethics? Option A. Halt the CRM system integration until the Compliance Department has thoroughly reviewed the system's data handling and communication functionalities, and a clear customer notification strategy, including consent mechanisms where necessary, has been developed and approved. Option B. Implement the CRM system integration with minimal changes to existing communication protocols, assuming current customer consents are sufficient for the new system's data handling. Option C. Delegate the responsibility of regulatory review to the IT department, as they are most familiar with the technical aspects of the CRM system, and proceed with integration based on their assessment. Option D. Proceed with the CRM system integration immediately to leverage its operational benefits, and then inform customers about the changes and seek consent retrospectively. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the CRM system integration immediately to leverage its operational benefits, and then inform customers about the changes and seek consent retrospectively. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient operational adjustments with the stringent regulatory obligations of Mapfre concerning customer communication and data protection. The core difficulty lies in implementing changes that impact customer data and communication channels without inadvertently breaching regulatory requirements, which could lead to significant penalties and reputational damage. Careful judgment is essential to ensure that all actions are compliant, transparent, and in the best interest of the policyholders. The correct approach involves a phased implementation that prioritizes regulatory review and customer notification. This strategy is correct because it directly addresses the regulatory framework by ensuring that any changes to data handling or communication methods are vetted for compliance before they are enacted. Specifically, it aligns with principles of data protection and consumer rights, which mandate transparency and the opportunity for customers to understand and consent to changes affecting their personal information or how they are contacted. By obtaining explicit consent where required and providing clear, advance notice, Mapfre upholds its legal and ethical obligations. An incorrect approach that proceeds with system integration without prior regulatory approval and customer notification is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the regulatory framework governing data privacy and customer communications. Such an action risks violating regulations that require explicit consent for data processing or changes in communication channels, leading to potential breaches of data protection laws and consumer protection legislation. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing the changes and then retrospectively informing customers, is also flawed. While it acknowledges the need for notification, the timing is problematic. Regulatory frameworks often require proactive measures and prior consent, not post hoc communication. This approach fails to provide customers with the opportunity to make informed decisions before their data is handled differently or their communication preferences are altered, thereby undermining their rights and potentially contravening regulations that emphasize informed consent and data minimization. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment and a compliance-first mindset. Before any operational change that could affect customer data or communication, a thorough review of applicable regulations, e.g., data protection laws, consumer rights legislation, must be conducted. This should be followed by a clear communication plan that outlines how and when customers will be informed and what steps will be taken to obtain necessary consents. Engaging legal and compliance teams early in the process is crucial to ensure that all proposed actions align with regulatory requirements and ethical standards. Question 19. When evaluating the implementation of a new AI-driven customer service chatbot for Mapfre, what is the most responsible approach to ensure compliance with regulatory frameworks and ethical standards? Option A. Prioritize rapid deployment to gain a competitive edge, addressing any potential compliance issues only if they arise. Option B. Deploy the AI chatbot immediately to leverage its efficiency benefits, assuming its underlying algorithms are inherently compliant. Option C. Rely solely on the AI vendor's assurances of compliance without conducting independent verification or testing. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, including data privacy, accuracy, and bias testing, followed by a phased rollout with continuous monitoring and human oversight. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, including data privacy, accuracy, and bias testing, followed by a phased rollout with continuous monitoring and human oversight. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Mapfre, as a financial services firm, operates under strict regulatory oversight designed to protect consumers and maintain market integrity. The implementation of new technology, such as an AI-driven customer service chatbot, requires careful consideration of how it aligns with existing legal and ethical obligations. The core challenge lies in balancing innovation and efficiency with the imperative to comply with regulations concerning data privacy, fair treatment of customers, and accurate information dissemination. Professionals must exercise sound judgment to ensure that technological advancements do not inadvertently lead to regulatory breaches or ethical lapses. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment and a phased implementation strategy that prioritizes regulatory compliance and customer protection. This means thoroughly vetting the AI chatbot for accuracy, bias, and data security before full deployment, and ensuring that human oversight mechanisms are in place. This approach is professionally sound because it directly addresses the potential pitfalls of new technology by proactively identifying and mitigating risks in accordance with regulatory frameworks. Specifically, it aligns with principles of data protection e.g., GDPR if applicable to Mapfre's operations in relevant jurisdictions, or equivalent local data privacy laws, by ensuring customer data is handled securely and ethically, and with consumer protection laws by guaranteeing that customers receive accurate and fair information, preventing misrepresentation or misleading advice. An incorrect approach would be to deploy the AI chatbot without adequate testing or validation. This is professionally unacceptable because it demonstrates a disregard for regulatory requirements and customer welfare. Such an approach risks violating data privacy laws by potentially exposing sensitive customer information or using it inappropriately. It also fails to uphold principles of fair treatment and accurate disclosure, which are fundamental to financial services regulation. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of implementation over thoroughness, leading to a chatbot that might provide inaccurate or biased information. This would contravene regulations designed to prevent misleading financial advice and could lead to significant reputational damage and regulatory penalties for Mapfre. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that the AI's output is inherently compliant without independent verification, neglecting the responsibility to ensure all customer interactions meet regulatory standards. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the relevant regulatory landscape governing Mapfre's operations. This involves identifying specific laws and guidelines related to customer service, data handling, and the use of technology in financial services. The next step is to conduct a thorough risk assessment of the proposed AI chatbot, considering potential compliance and ethical issues. Based on this assessment, a phased implementation plan should be developed, incorporating robust testing, validation, and ongoing monitoring. This framework emphasizes proactive compliance and a commitment to customer protection, ensuring that technological advancements serve to enhance, rather than undermine, Mapfre's regulatory standing and ethical commitments. Question 20. The audit findings indicate a control weakness in Mapfre's client onboarding process, specifically regarding the independent verification of customer identification documents. This weakness, if unaddressed, could lead to the onboarding of ineligible clients and potential regulatory breaches. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Mapfre's compliance department? Option A. Immediately update the audit report to reflect that the current process is acceptable, as it has not yet resulted in any confirmed breaches. Option B. Classify the finding as a low-priority issue and schedule a discussion about potential improvements during the next departmental strategy meeting. Option C. Develop and implement a detailed remediation plan that includes enhanced verification procedures, staff training, and a post-implementation review to confirm effectiveness. Option D. Document the current verification process in the audit report and note that it will be reviewed during the next scheduled system upgrade. Correct answer is C. Develop and implement a detailed remediation plan that includes enhanced verification procedures, staff training, and a post-implementation review to confirm effectiveness. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between immediate business pressures and the long-term integrity of Mapfre's compliance framework. The audit findings highlight a potential breakdown in the control environment, requiring a nuanced approach that balances operational efficiency with regulatory adherence. The core difficulty lies in addressing the identified control weakness without causing undue disruption to Mapfre's client service delivery or its financial reporting accuracy, all while ensuring full compliance with relevant regulations. The correct approach involves a structured, risk-based remediation plan that prioritizes the identified control gap. This approach is professionally sound because it directly addresses the audit findings with a clear, actionable strategy. It involves a thorough root cause analysis to understand why the control failed, followed by the implementation of specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART, corrective actions. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and internal control frameworks, such as COSO, which emphasize proactive risk management and continuous improvement. By focusing on remediation and validation, Mapfre demonstrates a commitment to maintaining a robust control environment, which is a fundamental expectation of its regulators and stakeholders. This proactive stance helps prevent future occurrences and reinforces the overall compliance culture within the organization. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on documenting the existing process without implementing improvements fails to address the root cause of the audit finding. This is professionally unacceptable, as it creates a false sense of security and leaves Mapfre vulnerable to recurring control failures, potentially leading to material misstatements or regulatory sanctions. It neglects the fundamental responsibility to remediate identified weaknesses. Another incorrect approach that involves deferring the remediation until the next major system upgrade is also professionally unsound. While system upgrades can offer opportunities for control enhancement, delaying action on a current, identified weakness is a failure to manage risk effectively in a timely manner. This approach prioritizes convenience over compliance and exposes Mapfre to ongoing risks that could have been mitigated sooner. It suggests a reactive rather than a proactive approach to compliance. A third incorrect approach that involves dismissing the finding as a minor issue without further investigation is highly problematic. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the audit process and its purpose. Even seemingly minor control weaknesses can have significant downstream consequences or indicate a broader systemic issue. This approach undermines the credibility of the internal audit function and Mapfre's commitment to a strong control environment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of audit findings. This includes understanding the nature and impact of the identified weakness, assessing the associated risks, and developing a proportionate response. Professionals should always prioritize actions that directly address the root cause of the issue, are aligned with regulatory expectations, and contribute to the long-term health of the organization's control framework. Collaboration with relevant departments, clear communication of the remediation plan, and robust follow-up to ensure effectiveness are also critical components of sound professional judgment.